Hey, welcome back. We're in our next chapter now. We're on Renaissance, Reformation, and Exploration. So this is going to be, it's actually two chapters combined, but we're roughly in the same time period from 1350 with the two chapters, from 1350 to 1800. So we start off with the Renaissance. This is basically the time right after the Middle Ages, where we actually start to see a rise in education again. Finally, people are not, crazy with the church power. They are, and they're not. They don't have the plague. They're not fighting political instability. There's finally some stability. There's finally some some decline of church power, and there's finally like decent health for a time. So people start focusing on human achievement. So because there's such a huge change in culture as well as education, people refer to this time as the Renaissance or the Rebirth. We call it the Italian Renaissance because it actually begins in Italy. If you remember, the Italian states are very crucial when it comes to, especially whenever it comes to trade. So a lot of these city states are located in like on ports where they have easy shipments coming in from other countries. And so for that reason, they experience a lot more culture from other countries. And then from Italy, it spreads to other parts of Europe. So Milan, Venice, and Florence all played very crucial roles in Italian politics. So Milan is a really rich city state. It's still a pretty rich city state, one of like known as the fashion capital of the world. Venice drew in traders from all over the world, so they're an international power. And then Florence like dominated the region of Tuscany, and it's controlled by the Medicis, and it's also a huge cultural center. So the Medicis are a really powerful family in Italy. They're kind of like modern day gangsters, I would kind of compare them to. And they control like politics, they control money, they're friends with the church. Like they are number one when it comes to like well known families during this time period. So, like even a preacher named Savonarola tries to challenge the Medici rule and takes over Florence for a little bit until he starts to challenge the church. And then when he does that, the church tries him for heresy and then they kill him. So then the Medicis get power again. But yeah. Anyway, so this is your map of Italy. Italy is the one that looks like the boot, as you recall. So this is just for your reference so that you can kind of understand what I'm talking about whenever I say there's port cities everywhere. Milan isn't necessarily a port city, it's just a really rich city. But they have this whole region you see here. It has the Po River going through it, and it connects directly to the Adriatic Sea. So it's not like they don't have access to like shipments and goods. Plus, Genoa is right here. Florence, on the other hand, has a direct like port, and Venice is a major port city. So we talk about political power. This is a major fascination during this time. One of the great authors in the Renaissance is Machiavelli. Yeah, Niccolo Machiavelli writes a book called The Prince, and it's really influential when it comes to like political power in the Western world. A lot of kings studied his book, and the main idea is just basically like how to acquire and keep power. It's not for the faint of heart because he's very like hardcore and to the point about how he feels power should be made and kept. He doesn't think that morality has very much to do with politics at all. Basically, it doesn't matter what's right or what's good. You need to do what you need to do to keep power and run a country. And so a lot of people remember him for that. One of his main quotes is, "For the state's sake, a leader must do good when possible, but be ready to do evil when necessary." And that pretty much sums him up for the most part. Also, those are gloves in his hand, I think. Someone was asking me that the other day, probably so he doesn't get blood on his hand. Who knows? So So, a major invention during this time period, notice it's this time period and not the Middle Ages, is the printing press. It's invented around the year 1440 by Johann Gutenberg. A lot of people were confused and I guess Googled answers for accomplishments or inventions during the Middle Ages that were like worthy or, noteworthy or important. And a lot of people said the printing press. And while the printing press is a very noteworthy invention, it was not invented during the Middle Ages. It comes about during the Renaissance. So the reason that the printing press is really important is because before this, the way that books were printed was they were written by hand. And so if you can imagine having to copy an entire book by hand just so that other people could have a copy of it, it takes a long time. And for that reason, not very many people have books. We take books for granted these days. If we're honest, most people are not able to. They're not able to own books because they don't have a means to get to them. The monks are the ones who are copying them down in their scriptorium. So once the printing press comes about, we create basically it's like a stamp is how I would kind of describe it. You engrave the writing on the template, and then you get a piece of paper. You would lay the paper over the template and then press down on the paper so that the ink would rub off of the template onto the paper. And so you could make copies of things much faster. So even though, the engraving process was pretty long, it's much shorter than having to write things by hand. The very first thing that is printed during this time on the printing press is the Bible. Surprise, surprise. So another movement during the Renaissance is based on the classic works of like Greece and Rome. Greece and Rome are going to come up time and time and time again. So during the Middle Ages, Greece and Rome kind of like fall on the back burner. We kind of let go of education and like philosophy and studying the humanities. But during the Renaissance, we bring all that back. And we call this focus humanism. This movement is all called humanism. So we're focusing on studying the humanities. Get it? Humanism, humanities, human. So the humanities have to deal with, you as a human, like how you speak, grammar, how you speak, rhetoric, meaning like if you can speak persuasively, how well your reasoning is, poetry, moral philosophy, and history. Those are all major humanities. So we talk about Petrarch as being known as the father of the Italian Renaissance humanism. He kind of gets everything going, gets the ball rolling. And a lot of people start kind of like digging in. They're like, like instead of studying religion, maybe we should study more of these humanities. So instead of focusing solely on like theology, like people had done during the Middle Ages, the shift goes towards the humanity classes. Humanists also believed in using the classical language of Latin. So a lot of the lawyers, religious leaders, and scholars would use Latin, and that was kind of like the formal way of speaking with one another or writing. Other people, if you were not like educated or higher up in society, then you probably used the vernacular. And the vernacular is just a really fancy way of saying, the local language. So we speak English, our local language would be English. If you're more educated, you may speak Latin during this time period anyway. So we get into like Latin and the vernacular, and we can talk a little bit about Dante's Divine Comedy. So he writes the Divine Comedy in his local language. He writes it in the vernacular. The Divine Comedy is a long poem. It basically talks about the soul's journey through the 3 stages of hell, trying to achieve paradise. And we talk about this particular story not because of the content of it, but because he writes it in the vernacular. Why did he write it in the vernacular or in his local language? He argues if he would have only written it in Latin, then scholars wouldn't have been able to read it. Like only scholars would have been able to read it. He wouldn't have had the general public wouldn't have been able to enjoy the work. And so he's like, you need to write so that everybody can understand it. And so he gets criticized for this, actually. Like, a lot of people are kind of just like, you should have written that in Latin. Everything is written in Latin. How dare you write in the vernacular? And so he really starts a trend, honestly. Once he does this, a lot of other people kind of start to follow suit because it's cool, and like the everyday average Joes can, enjoy the plays and enjoy the works, the literature, and we start to see, more more interest in education and books and writing and things like that. So education is a major focus of the Renaissance. It was influenced by the humanist movement because a lot of people were like studying the humanities. It was like less focused on religion. Like I said, we're more secular during this time period, meaning we're more worldly. Humanists also believe that liberal studies would help people reach their fullest potential and that education could change people. Basically, the more educated you are, the more of a difference you're going to be able to make, the more influential you'll be, the more you'll make sense. Like, we don't want a bunch of ignorant people running around anymore. We want people to be educated and enlightened and understand, like, knowledge, have knowledge. So a lot of books are written on education, and a lot of schools are established during this time as well. So the purpose of a liberal education, because that's one of the main kind of like focuses, is to produce individuals who follow a path of virtue and wisdom. Liberal education basically means that you are getting a well-rounded education. You're getting a little bit of history. You're getting a little bit of math. You're getting a little bit of astronomy. You're going to get a little PE. You're going to get some rhetoric. You're going to get some grammar. You're going to get some philosophy. Like, everything is going to tie in, and you're going to be educated and well-rounded in many subjects. And so the more that you know, the more wise that you are, the more virtuous that you are, according to the Renaissance. So women in education, because, some women are educated, not all of them, but there are a few. The few female students who attended humanist schools study the classics, and they're encouraged to know some history, but they are told not to learn about mathematics or rhetoric. Instead, they focus on like writing, dancing, singing, playing the lute, appreciating poetry, all these like entertaining things that, women are kind of like a fixture of entertainment. They're not really, meant to be. They're not smart. They're not as smart as men, apparently. So religion and morals are also supposed to be the foremost of the education for Christian ladies, so they can be good wives and mothers, good Christian wives and mothers. So that's also emphasized as well. So artists during this time, by the way, bonus points if you can tell me the names of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and where they come from. I'm going to tell you anyway. But, Italian Renaissance artists are actually their names. The most popular ones are actually where the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles get their names, if you didn't know. Anyway, so artists during this time wanted to imitate nature. A lot of them like paint the human body. We got a lot of like naked bodies during this time period as well in the paintings. Anyway, you do have some that are like dressed, of course, but the focus here is the human body. A lot of paintings are also like just beautiful scenes, and a lot of them are painted on, or they're like fresco style paintings, which basically means that they're done on like wet plaster with like a water-based paint to make it look like it's 3D and textured. This time period also produces like major advances in sculpture and architecture, and a lot of the architects base their style on classic Greek and Roman architecture. Guess what? The Greeks and the Romans again. So here's some frescoes. Hi. And then here we have the High Renaissance masters. So we're going to start talking about some of these artists. I'm not going to talk about Donatello, but Da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo are three of your major artists during the High Renaissance. And if you recall from the Middle Ages and High Middle Ages, high in front of the Renaissance just means the end of the Renaissance. High Renaissance, end of the Renaissance. So from 1490 to 1520, this is where we start seeing new styles of paintings, and where we where we will talk about these artists. So Da Vinci is the most famous of all of these artists. I know that y'all have all heard of Da Vinci. He's known as the Renaissance man because he literally embodied everything about the Renaissance and like education in the Renaissance, the humanities, that sort of thing. He was an artist, he was a scientist, he was an inventor, he was a visionary, he did everything. He mastered the art of realistic painting. He even dissected human bodies so that he could see how they worked for the purposes of his science and art. So, he takes it to the extreme. Here's his Mona Lisa painting. It's probably one of the most famous paintings in the world. And I show you this. This is in the Louvre. This is where it's located. Her eyes, if you pause this and get up and look, her eyes follow you all around the room, no matter where you are. It appears that they're following you anyway. It's just kind of like how he painted it. Raphael is the next Ninja Turtle / high Renaissance artist. And by the age of 25, he becomes one of Italy's best painters. Very well known. He's admired for his Madonnas. And Madonnas are basically just paintings of the Virgin Mary. So this is the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, I'm assuming. Chubby baby. And he's also known for his work, his frescoes that he produced in the Vatican Palace, where the Pope is. Michelangelo is the third Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, and he's an accomplished painter, sculptor, and architect. So he does a little bit of everything as well. He's not really much of a scientist, though. He's just a major artist. So he works with great passion and energy on a remarkable number of projects, including the Sistine Chapel. So your assignment, the interactive assignment, is where you get to tour the Sistine Chapel in Rome, virtually, of course, and look at all the different people that he was able to include, the different scenery that he was able to include. The beauty of the idealized human beings in his paintings are meant to be a reflection of divine beauty. So basically, the more beautiful the body that his subject had, the more godlike the figure was. So, and here's a picture of the ceiling in the Sistine Chapel. And this video clip actually shows you how they maintain it, how they clean everything and keep the colors so bright and touch it up, that sort of thing. It happens once a year for an entire month during the non-operational hours, between 5 and 12. They clean the entire building. It takes a whole month to get through the whole thing. So moving on, the next part of this chapter is about the Protestant Reformation. Okay, so this happens from 1517 to 1600. So Protestant, if you notice, has the word protest in it. The Protestant Reformation is referring to people, Christians, who protested the Catholic Church. So during the Renaissance, a lot of Christian humanists wanted to reform the Catholic Church because they thought it was corrupt. They were aware of the monstrosities that the church had committed, especially during the Inquisition, whenever they were literally just charging people for heresy and torturing them and killing them, charging people to rub dead people's bones for good luck, superstitious things like that. So a lot of people are look, we need to focus just more on the Bible itself. We don't need to focus on these relics. We don't need to focus on heretics and things like that. Let's just pay attention to the Bible. Let's learn about the Bible, and let's try to just be Christians, be close to God. And so the most famous of all of these people was Erasmus. And he believed that Christianity should show people how to live a good life from day to day, not just provide a belief that might help them be saved. So he focuses more so on your daily living, not it's a lifestyle change. It's not just you're gonna act this way to believe that you're saved. You can't just confess your sins and then be saved. It's you have to walk the walk and talk the talk and walk the walk, essentially. So he believed the Catholic Church needed to return to simpler times. He had disagreed with a lot of practices of the Catholic Church, especially indulgences. So an indulgence is basically a document or a relic that the church would sell um, after it was like signed by the Pope. And whenever you did something like that, like if you sold it to someone or if you were a Christian and you bought something like that, it was supposed to like forgive you of your sins. Your sins are supposed to be forgiven because you paid the church for this document or for like this relic. So Erasmus was like, that nowhere in the Bible does it talk about anything like that. You know, he's like, I don't think this needs to happen anymore. He didn't want to break away from the Catholic Church. He just wanted to like change things within it and make people see that like it's not okay to take advantage and extort people for money. So his ideas prepared the way for the Reformation. Okay, so this is just the beginning. A lot of people start following him, including this guy named Martin Luther. So Martin Luther is a monk in the Catholic Church. He's also a German professor and teaches the Bible. So Luther comes to the conclusion that humans cannot be saved by gathering works. Like you can't just like do good things and get saved. You could never do enough good to be saved, is basically what he says. He believes that through faith only, humans can be saved. And so he calls it, and we still call it, justification by faith. So the only way that you can be saved, it's not by what you do, it's just by like believing like that you have, you know, been forgiven of your sins and that you can enter heaven. So it becomes the main teaching of the Protestant Reformation. So Luther and other Protestants, to them, like the Bible was the only valid source for religion and truth. And guess what? Now that we have the printing press and more people have access to books, more people have Bibles that they can read themselves. They don't have to rely on the church to tell them what the Bible says. So there's a lot of pros to having an education and being able to read things for yourself. So Luther, whenever he gets fed up to this point where he like is kind of, he's really over indulgences as well. So like not only does Erasmus hate the indulgences, but Luther does too. He's like the only reason that people are doing this is because they're trying to raise money. As soon as there's also this guy, Johann Tetzel, he basically says, as soon as the coin in the coffee rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Like that was something that like people literally, like he was a monk and he was like advocating for indulgences. People would literally like say things like that, like, if you pay these indulgences, we'll save you from purgatory, we'll save you from hell. And so Luther is like, this is crap. You're only clearing a person's conscience. You're not clearing their sins. You don't have the authority to do that. So on October 31st in 1517, Luther writes down 95 arguments against indulgences and other practices of the Catholic Church, and then he nails them to the Castle Church. Thousands of copies of the 95 Theses were printed and spread all over Germany thanks to the printing press. And so everyone was able to see what Luther was like, talking about and how corrupt the church really was. And like, it's not like you can really, obviously, like they want to kill him. Don't get me wrong. Cause like all these other people who've been like tried for heresy, they want to kill him. They want to find him. He runs away and, make sure that he's like, I think he goes like Switzerland or something, like runs as fast as he can to get away so that they can't capture him and like execute him. But he gets a lot of people talking about the church, and this is where the church like loses like major authority, major. So this is him posting his theses to the church door. And honestly, this was kind of like how news is spread during this time too, like because it's not like you had enough copies to give everybody. So like, which we did because of the printing press, but before, like people just like post stuff on doors, like how we have bulletin boards and things like that. It's like a bulletin, like, hey, come check it out. But for him to like go up and just like nail it on there took some audacity for sure. So in 1520, Luther called for a break from the Catholic Church. He's like, I'm done. He wanted to keep communion. He wanted to keep baptism. He's like, those things are mentioned in the Bible. Like, I understand that. He also said the clergy needs to, the clergy should marry. He said it's okay if you're a church member and you get married. and that goes against the Catholic Church's teachings as well. His main focus was like faith saves the individual, not just works. So Luther was made an outlaw by the Edict of Worms from Germany. So like they basically say like anybody who follows him wants to like we're gonna burn him, we're gonna kill him. He's gonna be captured and he's going to be executed. So his writings are burned. He's of course to be captured based on this edict and delivered to the emperor. So Luther's ruler sent Luther into hiding and protected him when he returned in 1522. So he was like ready to kind of like face the music, and he's like, all right, it's cool. And then his ruler actually like says, no, like you need to go like hide. So over time, Luther's doctrine became known as Lutheranism, and the Lutheran Church is the first Protestant church. Yep. So all the other Protestant churches that you know of kind of like sprouted from that. So moving on, the age of exploration. So during the 1500s to the 1700s, European explorers had made many voyages. And like, honestly, this is a time of a lot of discovery. People are reading, people have like maps, people have like the technology to actually like, to get somewhere and do something in life, to make changes. And so people are looking for wealth. They start looking for new land. They start looking for mythical legends that they had read about in other people's books, especially people like, I just went blank. I'll think of it in a second. Anyway, and people, more people to convert to Christianity, like more people to save, more souls to save. So they would find civilizations that they never would have dreamed of. They established the first global trading empire during this time. One of the major explorers that we know of is Amerigo Vespucci. And so after reading the accounts of Vespucci's explorations, a German mapmaker decided to name the New World after him. And so they call the new lands America. So in 1507, that's whenever we start calling North America and South America America, and it's after Amerigo. So here is a major kind of like, you can see trade routes and things like that, like where different people traveled. This would be like Columbus's voyages. Here we have the Silk Road. We can talk a little bit about the Portuguese trading and like salt trades, different things like that. So here, I like this map also because it tells you what things are traded as well. So like what you get from different regions. So here from China, you get porcelain. From the Moluccas, you get cloves. It's like a spice. From China, you can find silk. From India and China, you get ginger, another, spice seasoning herb. Not herb really, but it's a root really. And then from the Moluccas, you also get nutmeg. Then the Caribbean Isle is allspice. Africa, you're able to get ivory and gold, and as well as salt cones. India, you can get pepper and rubies. And then from Sri Lanka, you get cinnamon. And so there's a huge exchange of different spices and different goods all around the world. It's a global society. And so it makes sense that more people would want to be able to travel to the Americas. So obviously, Europeans had remained in their part of the world for like thousands of years. Over time, explorers had improved their ships and their navigational tools, and they're able to travel around the world. They can go further. The first countries to really travel around the world are Portugal and Spain. Then the Netherlands and England and France kind of like follow in. But Portugal and Spain are your main two countries that are like on the map. So Europeans have become fascinated with Asia because Marco Polo, that's who I was trying to think of earlier, had written about his journey to Asia in the 13th century. And he talks about all these different like creatures that he comes in contact with. And it's just a magical kind of like journal. And so a lot of people are just like, oh my gosh, that would be so cool to be able to like travel to Asia and like encounter some of these things as well. So trade with Asia eventually is shut down by land because people are having to pay so many like taxes and things like that to like travel through other countries. And so it's like, if you want to come through here, like, you're going to have to pay us. And so it becomes super expensive. And then eventually it just gets shut down altogether. Different story. We'll talk about that later. The next option by reaching Asia was by sea. So a lot of people start looking for new ways to get to Asia by sea. A lot of them are motivated by God, glory, and gold. So teaching about God, finding gold, or obtaining glory, just like being known for someone who circumnavigated the globe or whatever. Also, they know that the earth is not flat, it's round. Anyway, so some of the other reasons that they're able to like travel further is because of the new technology. So the caravel is a small, very fast ship that can hold large cargo that's created by the Portuguese. And then we also get some other inventions like there's different types of compasses and things like that. So in 1420, the Portuguese led the way in exploration by sailing along the south along the West African coast. So Portugal's like, we'll just, since we can't go through land anymore, since this is out of the question, we will just go around the coast of Africa and come back up. We'll just do that. And like, that's a pretty long like trip, honestly. But if you're going to India, it's cool. Why not? This cape here, we call it the Cape of Good Hope because like you're like, oh, finally we reached the southern tip. There's hope to come back around. Like we're gonna make it through this. So the first person to sail around the Cape of Good Hope, and reach India is Vasco da Gama. Upon return to Portugal, he made a huge profit on the cargo that he brought back. So like everybody sees like, hey, he can like get over here and he's like picked up a bunch of gold. He's picked up a bunch of like spices and like all kinds of things. Like he's able to stop at many different ports because he like goes around Africa. He goes up through Asia and India. And so like people are like, we need to do this too. So like tons and tons of explorers start using this like trade route or this travel route. A lot of educated explorers at this time knew that the world was round, like I said, but we didn't know like how big around it was. It's not that we didn't know it was round. Okay, we knew it was round. We just didn't know how big around, and that's fine. So the circumference of the globe kind of like prohibits some people from wanting to go as far as before. So like we knew that America was out there, obviously, and then it's located between Europe and Asia, but we didn't really know like the exact size of like the Asian continent or these other continents as well is something to kind of keep in mind also. So whenever we talk about Christopher Columbus and like him thinking that he had landed in India and calling the natives Indians and that sort of thing, like it's kind of like funny now. It's laughable now, but back then it's like we didn't really know. We didn't have we didn't have satellites in space to like take pictures and show us like how far away things were. So, and that's the only taking up that I will do for Christopher Columbus because he is like a psycho. But anyway, he gets a lot of recognition for not very much. Anyway, so the Portuguese had reached India in Asia by sailing around Africa. The Spanish, instead of going around Africa, decide that they want to try to sail west to reach Asia. Like, we'll just go all the way around. Like, y'all are going to go around Africa. We'll just travel around the globe. We'll beat you there. So Columbus believed that he could reach Asia and the Indies by sailing west. He comes to, he goes up to ask for help from the Portuguese. The Portuguese are like, no, thank you. Like, we're good. Haha. Like, he thinks he can go around the globe and like make this trip faster. So then he goes to the Spanish and he talks to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, and they agree to sponsor his trip. So in 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue in search of Asia and India. Instead, we know that he lands in the Americas. More specifically, he lands in the Caribbean islands. And he thought that he had reached Asia, but he hadn't, quite reached Asia. Obviously, he never found the main part of Asia, never made it to Asia or India by sailing west, just happened to run into the Americas. So after 4 total voyages, he reached all the main Caribbean islands and Honduras, and he called the place the Indies because, it's like the Indian, it's like India. So he's calling it the Indies. And the natives who live there are Indians, of course. So when he gets here, he's like, oh, I'm claiming this land for Spain. Like, we're going to find some gold. We're going to get some riches. We're going to bring back some goods. And he does bring back quite a few goods, but he also like brings back a bunch of like the Native Americans and like enslaves them in Europe. He decimates their entire population. If they can't bring back enough gold to pay for, the riches that he thought that there were, then he would like suspect they were lying to him. Their hands would get cut off, different things like that. Like people finally, like the natives, like they fear him. They fear the Spanish. They fear his ships coming because they know that it's just like a bad deal. So this is the world as Columbus knew it. Yeah, according to his thinking. And then here's the actual world. Columbus's world. Europe is so small, Asia is so big, Africa is so big, and then he didn't even no clue, clueless. Anyway, like I said, there's no satellites or anything like that. So, then we need to talk about Magellan. Another Spanish explorer is Ferdinand Magellan. So in 1519, he sails from Spain, and he wants to find a sea route through the Americas because, like, he's intelligent enough to know that, like, Columbus had landed in the Americas, not India. And so in 1520, he passes through a waterway along the southern tip of South America. And we call that now, even today, the Strait of Magellan. It's named after him. His fleet reached the Philippines, and the native people killed him. So I don't know exactly what happened, but he got stabbed. Long story short. And so only one of his ships made it all the way back around to Spain. But because it was his ship and because he started the voyage, he gets credit for being the first guy to sail entirely around the world, to circumnavigate the globe. So I'll let you think of that whatever you want. Here's his voyage around the world. This is where he starts, here in Spain. He makes it around, and this strait gets named after him. And he makes it to the Philippines, gets killed, and then his crew goes on without him. One ship. Yeah, anyway. But here's his strait that they traveled through. Anyway. Magellan is another frustrating explorer, but whatever. So after Columbus's voyages to the Americas, no one knew necessarily that he had stumbled upon 2 major continents, like the Americas. So Spain and Portugal wanted exploration rights to the new lands, like once they realized it, So they come up with this treaty so that they can kind of share the land. And it's like, look, Spain can have this side and Portugal can have this side. Okay, cool. So in 1494, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. And this basically calls for a line to be drawn from the north to the south so that Spain could get the area west of the line and then Portugal would get the area east of the line. So Portugal gets all of this, which most of this is already claimed anyway. I mean, they can trade there all they want. And then Spain basically gets all the rest of the New World. Who gets the better end of the deal? Spain. Spain gets all this new land that's not been claimed. This is all mostly claimed, okay? Anyway, they didn't know, like I said, no satellites, no proper, imaging for the globe and that sort of thing. So Spain receives the better end of the treaty. Portugal did get claim to Brazil, and that's why they speak Portuguese in Brazil. France, England, and Holland didn't accept the division because, who had claim to the Americans in the first place? There were people already living there, the native people. Even though we've all just, decimated their entire population, it's fun. After the Treaty of Tordesillas, the Spanish began exploring the Americas. So they're like, well, look at all this land we've got. They set up base in the Caribbean because that's where Columbus had landed and got everything started. And then they start searching out for goods. They kind of make some money off this deal. So we call them conquistadors. They're conquerors. They were the Spanish explorers of the 1500s that are in search of glory, God, and gold. So one of these conquistadors is Hernan Cortez. So he is the one who basically, like, you know, tries to conquer the Aztecs. Cortez and about 600 soldiers land on the Gulf Coast of Mexico for their search for gold. And, you know, the Aztecs themselves had thought that, like, Cortez and his men might be messengers from God. And so they, like, kind of accept them with open arms. And then Cortez, like, takes advantage of these people. And as a result, like, he's able to capture the Aztec leader and, like, take over everything pretty quickly. Montezuma is the Aztec leader. I don't know if you guys have heard of, like, Montezuma's Revenge, and when you go to Mexico, because, like, they say if you drink the water in Mexico, like, you can get really sick. Like, they call it Montezuma's Revenge on everyone for conquering the Aztecs. So anyway, Cortez thought that Tenochtitlan, the land of the Aztecs, is filled with gold. He marched up on the capital city, like, unopposed, of course. Within 2 years, he had conquered the Aztecs. And he and his men, of course, because they're European, bring smallpox to the Aztecs unintentionally. They kill a bunch of them, and other tribes also joined him to defeat the Aztecs because the Aztecs were, like, number one. And so the other tribes were kind of like, it's our chance to shine. And they join in and, like, kill each other too. So the effects of the fall of the Aztecs, we get a new language, Spanish. People become Christian. And you get a few Mexican traditions that remain, but most of them kind of disappear forever. So with all of these explorers coming in the New World, a lot of changes are also brought, and people start trading, like, goods back and forth, right? So we get stuff from the native people. The native people get stuff from the Europeans. Like, everything is fine and dandy to an extent, besides the fact that, like, a bunch of the Native Americans are dying from disease or being killed or sold into slavery or raped. So new goods are introduced to both the native people and the explorers. So the Columbian Exchange is what this is called. It's named after Columbus. What a joy! He gets another thing named after him. It's called it's called the Columbian Exchange. Big whoop! It's the exchange of plants, animals, and diseases between Europe and the Americas. Notice the diseases because they do spread diseases back and forth. The immune systems are different. You've grown up in different parts of the world. Like, you're exposed to different climates, different germs and bacteria, and so, like, you know, things are different. So this exchange is named after him because he's credited with bringing Europe into contact with the Americas, even though he's not the person who did it. Anyway, this exchange had both positive and negative effects on both people. So some of the things that went from the Americas to Europe: squash, pumpkins, turkeys, peanuts, potatoes, tomatoes, corn. Oh, it's so close to Thanksgiving too. Sweet potatoes, peppers, tobacco, pineapples, cacao, beans, and vanilla. All of these things come to Europe. Tomatoes is really funny to me because, you know, like, we know Italy, like, Italian food is like, you know, a lot of sauces are made out of tomatoes. Anyway, the potatoes in Ireland, the Irish famine. Anyway, back to what goods are brought from Europe. So from Europe, Africa, and Asia to the Americas comes a lot of disease. Awesome. Whooping cough, smallpox, the flu, typhus, measles, malaria, diphtheria. Livestock, you know, horses, pigs, sheep, cattle. Grains, rice, barley, oats, wheat. Peaches, pears, coffee beans. Woo, because I like coffee. Turnips, olives, and onions. So, oh, and then we've got sugarcane, honeybees, bananas, grapes, and citrus fruits as well. So kind of cool. The exchange is kind of cool. I don't think that Americans really got the best deal with the disease, but everything else is okay. So Queen Isabella of Spain granted encomiendas to her Spanish subjects. Basically, Spanish settlers would travel to the new lands and they would, like, govern and protect the natives. Instead, Native Americans were actually put to work on sugar plantations in the gold and silver mines, and were offered very little protection in exchange. So a lot of them die from smallpox, a lot of them die from typhus, a lot of them from measles. The population of Hispaniola had a population of 250,000 when Columbus arrived, and then by 1530, that's 1492, by the way, and then by 1538, only 500 Native Americans had survived. So in Mexico, the population dropped from 25 million in 1500 to 1 million in 1630. So yeah, their impact is detrimental. Anyway, so this is the last of it, and this slave voyages also is kind of an interesting little tidbit, so I would definitely click on it. If you have any questions, as usual, email me, let me know how are you doing. If you want some bonus points, you should email me, let me know something that you found interesting in the slides. All right, have a good afternoon.